My name is Sam Hayes, and for the past 3 months, I've been living a life most folks would consider either a dream or a self-imposed exile. I work as a fire lookout at the old Chestnut Ridge Tower, deep in a section of the Appalachian Mountains that cell service forgot and where the nearest paved road is a good 2-hour hike followed by a 30-minute drive over gravel that would make a tank reconsider its life choices. The pay is decent, especially for someone like me, whose resume is a patchwork of character building jobs and a college degree I'm still not sure was worth the debt. But it wasn't just the money. It was the quiet, the solitude. After a particularly messy breakup and the soul-crushing grind of city life, the idea of being alone with nothing but trees and sky for company sounded like a balm. Or so I thought. The tower itself is ancient, a skeletal steel structure creaking and groaning with every gust of wind, topped by a small, square cabin with windows on all sides. It's not exactly luxurious. The amenities consist of a cot, a wood-burning stove, a propane-powered refrigerator that hums a disconcerting tune, and a radio that's my only link to the outside world, mostly for daily check-ins with my supervisor, a gruff, seen-it-all type named Earl. Earl was the one who hired me. He didn't ask many questions, just looked me up and down during the interview at the regional forestry office, his eyes lingering on my sturdy boots and the calluses on my hands from a previous stint in construction. "You ain't afraid of being alone, are ya, son?" he'd asked, his voice like stones grinding together. "No, sir," I'd replied, maybe a little too quickly. "Prefer it, mostly." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good. This mounting it prefers folks who know how to keep to themselves." He drove me up the first time, his ancient pickup rattling like a can of bolts. The road was more of a suggestion, a path carved through dense forest that seemed to swallow the truck whole. Soon discovered why. When we finally reached the clearing where the trail to the tower began, he cut the engine. The silence that descended was absolute, a heavy blanket that muffled even the sound of my own breathing. "All right," he said, pulling a ring of keys from his pocket and a folded, yellowed piece of paper. "Tower's a 40-minute hike that way." He pointed up a steep, barely visible path. "Radio in every morning at 0800, every evening at 1800. Any sign of smoke, you call it in immediately, day or night. Standard procedure. You got that?" "Got it." He handed me the keys. Then the paper. It was thick, almost like cardstock, and the creases were deep, as if it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. "And these," he said, his voice dropping a notch, his gaze turning serious, "are the other procedures. Specific to Chestnut Ridge. You read him. You learn you. You live by him. No exceptions, no questions. Understand?" The shift in his tone was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. "Understood," I said, my curiosity piqued. He just nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Good. Supplies are dropped at the trailhead every 2 weeks. Next one's in 13 days. Don't wander too far from the tower, especially after dusk. And, try not to disturb things." "Disturb things?" I asked. Earl just grunted, already turning back to his truck. Figure it out, or you won't. Just stick to the rules, Hayes. For your own sake. With that, he climbed in, fired up the engine with a protesting roar, and rumbled away, leaving me standing there with a rucksack, a set of keys, and a very ominous-looking piece of paper. The hike up was brutal, a relentless climb that left my lungs burning and my legs screaming. But the view from the tower, once I finally reached it and wrestled the rusty door open, was breathtaking. Wave after wave of forested mountains rolled out in every direction, a sea of green under an endless blue sky. For a moment, I forgot Earl's unsettling words and just drank it in. This was it. Solitude. Peace. The cabin was dusty but serviceable. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning, unpacking, and familiarizing myself with the equipment. The radio crackled to life with a reassuring burst of static when I tested it. The stove, after a bit of coaxing, caught and began to radiate a welcome warmth as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was only then, with the last light fading and the wind beginning to howl around the tower like a mournful beast, that I remembered the paper Earl had given me. I smoothed it out on the small wooden table, its surface illuminated by the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. The heading at the top read, Chestnut Ridge Tower, Special Operational Protocols. Below it, a list of typed, numbered rules. Some seemed mundane, almost common sense for a remote posting. Others were decidedly one. Daily check-ins 1800 HRSQ mandatory. If you miss a check-in, state your full name and the phrase, "All is well at the Ridge," 3 times during the next scheduled call. Do not deviate from this phrasing. 2. Log all observations. Standard smoky fire reporting is primary. However, also log any unusual animal sightings, species, number, behavior, unexplained lights, or distinct sounds. Be specific with times and locations. Do not investigate these phenomena yourself. Report, do not engage. 3. The trapdoor. The trapdoor in the cabin floor leads to the old cellar. It is to remain bolted shut from dusk until dawn, without exception, no matter what you hear. 4. The south-facing window. After sunset, keep the shutter on the south-facing window closed and locked. Do not look out this window between sunset and sunrise, even if you believe you see or hear something requiring your attention. Use the other windows for observation during these hours. 5. Offering sue if you find small, carved wooden figures or arrangements of stones near the tower base. Do not disturb them. Report their presence during your next check-in. Earl will advise. 6. The radio unscheduled transmissions. You may occasionally hear voices or music on the radio that are not from forestry service channels. Do not respond. Do not acknowledge. Turn the radio off for at least 1 hour. If the transmissions mention your name, leave the tower immediately and proceed to the emergency cache, map and logbook. Do not return until authorized by Earl. 7. Visitors. You should not receive any visitors other than scheduled supply drops or Earl himself. If anyone else approaches the tower, do not engage with them. Do not invite them in. Contact Earl immediately. If they are persistent, refer to Protocol 11. 8. The wind chime. You will find a set of old wind chimes in the supply locker. If the wind is still, but the chimes are ringing, secure yourself inside the cabin and do not leave until they have been silent for a full hour. This rule supersedes all others except direct fire emergency. 9. No whistling at night. Do not whistle outside the tower or with the windows open after dark. The mountain doesn't like it. 10. Personal effectsing. Do not leave personal items, clothing, tools, food outside the tower overnight. Anything left out may not be there in the morning, or it may be changed. 11. Persistent unwanted presence. Protocol 11. In the event of a persistent, unidentifiable, or threatening presence that does not retreat despite your non-engagement, as per Rule 7, you are authorized to use the flare gun located in the emergency kit. Fire one red flare directly upwards. Do not aim it at the presence. This is a signal, not a weapon. Earl will understand. Await further instructions. Do not use this protocol lightly. 12. The old growth trailing. There is a barely marked trail leading west from the tower base into the old growth forest. Do not take this trail. Do not even approach its entrance. Some places are best left undisturbed. I read the list twice, then a third time. A cold knot was tightening in my stomach. This wasn't the peace and quiet I'd signed up for. This was something else. The mountain doesn't like it. No matter what here. I looked around the small cabin, suddenly feeling a lot less secure. The wind howled, and the tower groaned in response. Was that just the wind? Or was it the sound of the ancient steel settling? Or something else entirely? I got up and checked the trapdoor in the floor. It was made of thick planks with a heavy iron bolt. I slid it home. It made a satisfying, solid thing. Then I went to the south-facing window. It had a thick wooden shutter on the inside with a sturdy latch. I closed it, the last of the twilight vanishing, plunging that side of the cabin into deeper shadow. My first night was restless. Every creak of the tower, every rustle of leaves outside, every distant snap of a twig sounded amplified, sinister. I kept thinking about the rules. Rule A3, no matter what you hear. What kind of things might I hear from a cellar in the middle of nowhere? Rule H90, the mountain doesn't like it. What did that even mean? I told myself it was just Earl being overly cautious. Or maybe even hazing the new guy. Old-timers in remote places often had their superstitions. It had to be that. But as the days turned into weeks, the unease didn't fade. It settled in, a constant companion, like the low hum of the propane fridge. I followed the rules. Religiously. I reported a strange screeching sound one night. Rule 82, which Earl dismissed as a bobcat, though it sounded like no bobcat I'd ever heard. I found a small, crudely carved wooden bird at the base of the tower steps one morning. Rule H5T. It was unsettlingly lifelike, its tiny wooden eyes seeming to follow me. I reported it, and Earl just said, "Leave it be. It's a gift." A gift from whom? For what? He never elaborated. The solitude I'd craved started to feel less like a balm and more like a weight. The silence between the wind's moans was too profound. The forest too watchful. And the rules were always there, thrumming in the back of my mind. It was on my 27th day, just over a week ago, that things started to escalate. It began subtly, as these things often do. The first noticeable change was the silence. Not the discovered why. Not the usual profound quiet of the mountains I'd grown accustomed to, but oppressed silence, like the air itself was holding its breath. Why? The birds stopped singing an hour before dusk. Not their usual gentle tapering off, but an abrupt cut, as if a switch had been flipped. Even the insects seemed to go mute. I noted it in the logbook as per Rule A2, 2015, HRS, unusual cessation of all natural ambient sound. Forest completely silent. Lasted approx. 45 minutes. Earl's only comment during the next check-in was a non-committal grunt. A couple of nights later, the scratching started. It came from below, from the cellar, directly under my cot. Rule H3. The trapdoor is to remain bolted shut from dusk until dawn, no matter what you hear. The first time it was faint, like a mouse scrabbling at the wood. I almost dismissed it. But it came again the next night, louder, more insistent. Not a mouse. This was heavier, more deliberate. Scrape, drag, thump. I lay there. Why? Rigid on my cot, the old springs groaning softly with my every shallow breath. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at me to unbolt the trapdoor, to shine my flashlight down there, to confront whatever it was. But Earl's voice, gravelly and serious, echoed in my mind on no exceptions, no questions. I pictured the heavy iron bolt, the thick planks. What could possibly be down there? The tower had been here for decades. Old supplies. Animals that had gotten trapped. Or something the rules were designed to keep in. The scratching would last for an hour or two, then stop as suddenly as it began. Sleep became a precious, fleeting commodity. I started keeping the kerosene lamp burning low all night. Its flickering light, a small comfort against the oppressive darkness and the sounds from beneath my feet. I logged it, of course. 10-2-230 HRS, persistent scratching and dragging sounds from cellar. Duration approx. 90 minutes. Earl's response: Eeg. Keep the bolt fastened, Hayes. Thanks, Earl. Super helpful. Then came the offerings, or rather, the change in offerings as per Rule H5. The small, carved wooden bird had been unsettling enough. But then, a few days after the scratching began, I found a new item at the base of the tower steps. It was a small, woven doll made of looked like dried grasses and twigs, bound with strands of dark hair. Human hair. Its features were crudely stitched with black thread. Its eyes, two shiny black buttons that seemed to stare right through me. It wasn't a gift. It felt like a warning, or a marker. I reported it, my voice trembling slightly. Earl was quiet for a long moment on the radio. Don't touch it, Hayes. Just leave it be. And be extra vigilant. Vigilant for what? He never said. The next day, the doll was gone. In its place was a single, perfectly preserved raven's feather, laid across the spot where the doll had been. The south-facing window. Rule A4, after sunset, keep the shutter on the south-facing window closed and locked. Do not look out this window between sunset and riset. Became a source of constant, low-grade anxiety. The rule itself was specific, almost arbitrary. Why only the south window? What was out there, in that particular direction, that I wasn't supposed to see? My imagination, fueled by sleeplessness and the increasingly bizarre occurrences, ran wild. Sometimes late at night, when the wind died down and the scratching from the cellar paused, I'd hear faint sounds from that direction, a soft rustling, like fabric dragging through leaves. A low murmur, too indistinct to be words, but definitely vocal. I'd find myself staring at the shutter, my hand itching to unlatch it, to peek through a crack. Just a quick look. What harm could it do? But the memory of Earl's stern face, the weight of those typed rules, always held me back. The fear of the unknown was potent, but the fear of breaking a rule, of inviting whatever consequences that might bring, was somehow stronger. One night, I swore I saw a faint, flickering light dance across the inside of the shutter, as if something luminous were passing by outside. I logged it, heart pounding. A3GG17HRS perceived faint, intermittent light reflection on interior of south window shutter. Origin unknown. Shutter remained secured. Earl, predictably, offered no explanation. Good. Keep it that way. The wind chimes. Rule 8. I'd found them tucked away in the supply locker on my first day, a set of 5. Tarnished brass tubes of varying lengths, hanging from a small wooden disc. They looked ancient. I hadn't thought much about them, other than the rule itself being odd. If the wind is still but the chimes are ringing, secure yourself inside the cabin and do not leave until they have been silent for a full hour. How could chimes ring if there was no wind? I found out on a Tuesday. The day had been unnervingly still. Not a leaf stirred on the trees that carpeted the mountainsides. The air was heavy, humid. Why? And silent that pressed silence again, but this time it felt expectant. I was on the catwalk that encircled the cabin, doing my routine visual sweep of the horizon when I heard it. Clang, ting, dong. A discordant metallic sound. I froze. The wind chimes. I hadn't hung them up. They were still in the locker inside the cabin. Clang, ting, dong. Dong. Clang. My blood ran cold. I scrambled back inside, my boots thudding on the metal grating. I looked at the supply locker. It was closed. The sound was coming from inside it. Faint, yes, but unmistakable. The chimes were ringing, and there wasn't a breath of wind. Not a whisper. My hands shook as I threw the heavy bolt on the cabin door. I checked the shutters on all the windows, ensuring they were latched tight. The rule said, secure yourself inside the cabin. It didn't say anything about the chimes being outside. The ringing from the locker grew louder, more insistent. Clang. Donji. Kalanchi LNG. It was as if a furious, invisible hand were shaking them. I backed away from the locker, pressing myself against the far wall, my eyes wide with a primal fear I hadn't felt since I was a child, terrified of the monster under my bed. Then, the sounds from outside began. First, a low guttural growl, seemingly from the base of the tower. It wasn't like any animal I knew. It was too deep, too resonant. Then, a chorus of clicks and chitters, like 1,000 oversized insects, coming from all directions. The tower groaned, a long, tortured sound, not from wind, but as if something immense were pressing against it. Scrarip. D-rag, T-imp. The cellar was awake again, angrier this time, the sounds more violent. And through it all, the incessant, maddening cling, dog of the winged chimes from inside the locker, a soundtrack to the nightmare unfolding around me. I squeezed my eyes shut, muttering the rule over and over. Secure yourself inside it, do not leave until they have been silent for a full hour. How long had it been? Minutes, an eternity. Something heavy slammed against the cabin door. The wood creaked, the bolt strained. I yelped, scrambling further into the corner. Grabbing the heavy iron poker from beside the wood stove. It wasn't much, but it was something. Another slam, harder this time. I could hear splintering wood. Then, a voice. Right outside the door. A woman's voice, sweet and melodic like honeyed poison. Sam. Sammy, dear. Are you in there? Let me in, sweetheart. It's cold out here. My mother. It sounded exactly like my mother. But my mother had been dead for 10 years. The chimes in the locker reached a fever pitch. A deafening cacophony. The scratching from the cellar was frantic. The thing outside the door cooed my name. I don't know how long I stayed huddled there. Poker clutched in a white-knuckled grip, teetering on the edge of sanity. It felt like hours. The assault on the tower, on my senses, was relentless. The voice outside shifted, sometimes my mother, my ex-girlfriend, sometimes a child crying for help. The growls and chitters rose and fell. The trapdoor vibrated with the violence beneath it. And then, as suddenly as it all began, the chimes in the locker stopped. One last, fading tinging. Silence. A silence so profound it roared in my ears. The scratching from the cellar ceased. The voice outside was gone. The pressure against the tower lifted. I didn't move. I barely breathed, counted. Slowly. 1 Mississippi. All the way to 60. Then I did it again, and again. An entire hour. Measured out in terrified heartbeats. When the hour was finally up, I uncurled myself, my limbs stiff and aching. The cabin was dark, the lamp having burned itself out. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting a shaky path through the loom. The door was scored with deep gouges. The wood around the bolt splintered. The trapdoor looked undisturbed, but I knew what I'd heard. I approached the supply locker, my heart still trying to escape my chest. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The wind chimes lay still, nestled amongst the spare blankets and canned goods, as if they'd never moved. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the radio, waiting for the 0800 check-in, the poker never leaving my side. When Earl's voice finally crackled through, I almost wept with relief. Chestnut Ridge, Hayes, you there? Earl. I managed my voice hoarse. Earl. The chimes, they rang. Last night. No wind. And things outside. There was a long pause. Longer than usual. When Earl finally spoke, his voice was flatter, grimmer than I'd ever heard it. You still in one piece, Hayes? Yeah, I think so. Did you leave the cabin while they were ringing? No, I stayed inside, like the rules said. Another pause. Good, that's good. He sounded relieved. Log it. Log everything you remember. And Hayes, yeah, you got 3 weeks left on your contract. You sure you want to see him through? I looked around the small, battered cabin. At the gouged door. At the trapdoor. At the south-facing window. It shudder a blind eye to whatever horrors lurked beyond. 3 more weeks of this. Could I do it? Did I even have a choice? I walking away now felt like letting the mountain win, letting them win. I'm staying, Earl, I said, trying to inject a confidence I didn't feel. I'll see it through. Earl just sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Your funeral, son. Your funeral. Earl's parting words. Your funeral. Son. Echoed in my mind for days after the wind chime incident. It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was a statement of fact. Delivered with the wary resignation of a man who'd seen too much. My decision to stay felt less like bravery and more like a stubborn refusal to acknowledge the abyss yawning at my feet. The week that followed was a descent into a new layer of hell. Sleep was a battlefield. I rarely won. The scratching from the cellar became a nightly ritual. A grotesque lullaby. Sometimes it was frantic, claws on wood. Other times it was a slow, deliberate dragging, as if something heavy and reluctant were being moved. I started sleeping with the iron poker beside my cot, though I knew, deep down, it would be as effective as a child's toy against whatever lurked beneath the trapdoor. The silence between these episodes was worse. It was a listening silence, the kind that makes the tiny hairs on your arms stand up. I found myself measuring my breaths, convinced that any sound I made was being cataloged, analyzed by unseen watchers. I started talking to myself in hushed tones, narrating my mundane tasks, boiling water, checking the horizon for smoke, just to inject a semblance of normalcy into the suffocating dread. It was a flimsy shield, but it was all I had. The offerings at the base of the tower continued, each one more unsettling than the last. One morning, it was a small, perfectly constructed bird's nest. But instead of eggs, it held 3 smooth, gray river stones, each with a single, dark red spot that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Another day, I found a child's mitten, knitted from faded blue wool, lying on the tower steps as if it had just been dropped. It was pristine, apart from the dampness of the morning dew. I logged them all, my voice a monotone during the check-ins. Earl never asked for details, just the usual. Leave it be. Hayes. Don't touch it. His lack of curiosity was somehow more terrifying than any explanation he could have offered. It was about 10 days after the wind chime terror, on an evening heavy with impending rain, that I broke Rule A9 again. Not intentionally, not this time. I was on the catwalk. The sky a bruised purple and gray, the air thick and smelling of ozone. I was trying to distract myself, to push back the encroaching paranoia, by humming. A tuneless, absent-minded hum, a habit from childhood I'd never quite shaken. I wasn't even aware I was doing it until the response came. Not whistling this time. A different sound. From the dense, darkening woods that pressed in on all sides of the tower. A low, guttural chuckle arose. It wasn't one voice, it was many. A chorus of deep, throaty sounds that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. It was a sound of amusement, but a cold, predatory amusement, like a cat watching a cornered mouse. It was the sound of something that knew it had all the time in the world. I froze, the hum dying in my throat. My blood turned to ice water. I hadn't whistled. I had hummed. Did the mountain object to all forms of musical expression? Or was it simply my presence, my continued defiance of its unspoken claim on this place, that it found Sog amusing? The chuckling continued, rising and falling in volume, seeming to circle the tower. I backed away from the railing, my gaze darting into the shadowy depths between the trees. I could see nothing, but I could feel them. Eyes. Countless eyes watching me. I scrambled back into the cabin, slamming the door and throwing the bolt with trembling hands. The wood, still bearing the scars from the wind chime night, felt pitifully inadequate. The chuckling outside didn't stop. It seemed to seep through the walls, through the floorboards. It was punctuated by soft thuds against the tower's steel legs, as if something large and heavy were bumping against them, testing their strength. I retreated to the furthest corner of the cabin, clutching the poker, my back pressed against the rough wooden planks. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the sound was inescapable. It was inside my head. The 1800 HRS check-in was approaching. Would Earl hear it over the radio? Would he even care? His responses had become increasingly terse, almost fatalistic. The chuckling finally subsided as true darkness fell, replaced by the drumming of rain against the cabin roof and windows. But the silence it left behind was charged, expectant. I didn't dare move until it was time for the check-in. "Earl," I said, my voice barely a whisper when he answered. They were laughing. Outside, not whistling, laughing. A long silence. Then, "You still there?" "Hayes." "Yeah." Anything else thumping against the tower legs, like something was bumping it. "Stay inside," he sighed, his voice flat. "And for God's sake, try not to attract any more attention than you already have." Attract attention. I was just trying to breathe. The next few days were a blur of rain and fear. The forest seemed to draw closer, the shadows deeper. The scratching from the cellar grew bolder, accompanied now by a faint, musky odor that seeped up through the floorboards, a smell of damp earth and something else, something rotten. Then came the radio. Rule F6. Why? The radio unscheduled transmissions. If the transmissions mention your name, leave the tower immediately and proceed to the emergency catch-attic. It had been relatively quiet on that front since the initial burst of old music. Why? I'd almost convinced myself that it had been interference, a stray signal from some distant station. I was wrong. It was late, well past midnight. The rain had stopped, but a thick fog had rolled in, blanketing the mountains, muffling all sound. I was dozing fitfully on my cot, the lamp turned low. The radio was off, the switch firmly in the down position. A sudden burst of static made me jump, my heart lurching. Then a voice. Clear, calm, and chillingly familiar. It was the same smooth, polished male voice I'd heard weeks before, the one that had mimicked Earl. "Samuel," it said, not Sam. Samuel. More formal. More intimate. "We've been patient, Samuel. I sat bolt upright, my skin crawling. The radio switch was still off. I stared at it, uncomprehending. "You're a stubborn one," the voice continued, a note of something that might have been admiration, or perhaps just clinical interest, in its tone. "Most don't last this long. Most make a mistake. A fatal one." My breath caught in my throat. "Rule 6. My name. But your time is running out." "Samuel," the voice said, its calm beginning to fray, a raw edge creeping in. "The mountain is hungry. It always gets what it wants." What are you?" I managed to stammer, violating the rule about not responding. But terror had overridden caution. A loud chuckle, like stones grinding together, echoed from the speaker. "We told you. We are the old bones, the deep roots. We are the hunger that predates your fleeting kind. And you, Samuel, are an unexpected delicacy. The emergency cage. Map in the logbook. Leave immediately." My mind raced, trying to process the instructions through the fog of fear. "Don't bother with Earl's little map, Samuel." The voice sneered, as if it could see me. "See the logbook on the table. That catch is empty. Picked clean long ago. A false hope he dangles before each new arrival." My stomach plummeted. "Empty. There's only one way out for you now," the voice said, its tone shifting, becoming almost seductive. "The old growth trail. It leads away from the tower, down into the valley. It's an older path, a truer path. Rule 12. Do not take this trail. Do not even approach its entrance." It was a direct contradiction. A trap. "We can guide you," the voice whispered. "It's dark out there, Samuel. And the forest is full of things that are not us. Things that would delight in tearing you apart slowly. But we can keep you safe. If you come to us, if you trust us." I was shaking violently, my teeth chattering. This wasn't just a voice on the radio anymore. This was a direct, personal invitation to damnation. "Make your choice, Samuel," the voice hissed. The politeness gone, replaced by a raw, predatory urgency. "Stay in that little metal cage and wait for the inevitable, or take the trail. Come to us. Become part of something eternal." The radio clicked off, leaving a silence so absolute it felt like a physical blow. My rucksack lay by the door. The flare gun was in the emergency kit. The logbook with the map, was it a lie? Was Earl sending me to my death with false hope? Or was this voice the liar, trying to lure me onto that forbidden trail? I had to make a decision. Stay and face whatever horrors the night and the rules still held. Or flee, taking my chances with a potentially empty cache, or worse, the beckoning darkness of the old-growth trail. The trapdoor beneath my cot gave a loud craquet, as if something heavy had just splintered one of the planks from below. That decided it. I grabbed my rucksack, my flashlight, and the flare gun. My hands were slick with sweat. I fumbled with the bolt on the cabin door, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. The fog outside was a solid white wall, impenetrable and cold. I stepped onto the catwalk. The air was frigid, biting at my exposed skin. I could see no more than a few feet in any direction. Then, from the swirling whiteness, from the direction of the unseen old-growth trail, came a whisper, carried on no discernible breeze. It was the same voice from the radio, but now it was all around me, intimate and terrifyingly close. Clever boy. Samuel, we knew you'd choose wisely. And from the fog, just at the edge of my vision, something began to coalesce. Darker than the fog itself. Tall. And moving. The shape resolving itself from the fog was tall, impossibly tall, and slender as a starved wolf. It didn't so much walk as flow. A ripple in the dense white. Like heat haze over asphalt. But cold. So very cold. I couldn't make out features, no face, no limbs in the conventional sense. Just a shifting, columnar darkness that seemed to drink the faint ambient light. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if breathed directly into my ear. You've been such a good guest, Samuel. So attentive to the rules. But some rules are meant to beg bent. My mind, already frayed, snapped. This wasn't a choice anymore. The voice on the radio, the whispers in the fog, the beckoning trail, it was all a lie, a carefully constructed trap. Rule at 12. Do not take this trail. Rule at 6. Leave the tower immediately and proceed to the emergency cache. The catch. Earl's catch. It was the only option that wasn't an open invitation to whatever this thing was. No. I croaked, my voice raspy. I fumbled with the flare gun, my fingers numb and clumsy. Rule A11. Persistent unwanted presence. Fire 1 red flare directly upwards. This qualified. Oh God, this qualified. The shadowy figure paused its advance. The whispering stopped. A palpable sense of surprise emanated from it. Or maybe it was just my wishful thinking. Wrong choice, Samuel. A new voice hissed. This one deeper, rougher, like bark scraping against stone. It came from my other side. From the direction of the tower, steps leading down into the darkness. Another shape was forming there, shorter, broader, but no less menacing. I didn't hesitate. I raised the flare gun, pointed it straight up into the oppressive ceiling of fog, and pulled the trigger. The whoosh and sudden, brilliant crimson glare were shocking in the monochrome world. The flare shot upwards, a streak of defiant light, before exploding in a shower of red sparks that momentarily illuminated the swirling fog, painting the scene in hellish hues. For a heartbeat. Why? I saw them more clearly, the tall, flowing one near the trail entrance. Its form vaguely humanoid, but stretched, distorted. And the shorter, stockier one at the head of the stairs, more bestial, with what looked like multiple, glowing eyes. Then the red light faded, plunging me back into a deeper darkness, the afterimage burning on my retinas. A screech tore through the night, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and pain, as if the light itself had burned them. It wasn't human, not animal, but something utterly alien. The two shapes recoiled, momentarily disrupted. That was my chance. I didn't head for the old growth trail. I spun around and plunged down the tower steps, the ones leading away from the main trail, towards the emergency cache marked on Earl's map. My rucksack banged against my back, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly, creating dancing, monstrous shadows. Behind me, the screeching intensified, joined by a chorus of howls and guttural roars. They were recovering. They were coming. The descent was treacherous in the fog and darkness. Roots snagged my ankles. Unseen branches whipped at my face. I stumbled, fell, picked myself up, driven by a primal terror that overrode pain and exhaustion. The map in the logbook had shown the catch about a mile north, west of the tower, hidden in a small rock outcrop. A mile. It felt like 100. The sounds of pursuit were terrifyingly close, crashing through the undergrowth. The snapping of twigs, those awful, multi-toned howls. They weren't trying to be stealthy. They were hunting. I risked a glance back. Through a momentary thinning of the fog, I saw movement. Dark shapes flitting between the trees, faster than any human could move. They were gaining. My lungs burned. My legs were screaming. The flashlight beam was starting to dim. Just as despair began to set in, I saw a jagged outcrop of rock, looming out of the fog, just like the map depicted. Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through my fear. I scrambled towards it, searching frantically for the catch. The map had indicated a small crevice, hidden behind a loose boulder. My fingers, raw and bleeding, scrabbled at the cold, damp stone. There. A boulder that shifted slightly under my weight. I heaved, adrenaline lending me strength I didn't know I possessed. It rolled aside with a groan, revealing a dark, narrow opening. I squeezed inside, flashlight held in my teeth, dragging my rucksack after me. The space was tight, smelling of damp earth and something metallic. And then my hand touched it, a sturdy, metal box. With trembling fingers, I unlatched it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dry leaves, were a few high-energy bars, a water purification kit, a first aid kit, a heavy-duty flashlight with spare batteries, and a small, well-oiled revolver with a box of ammunition. The voice on the radio had lied. The catch wasn't empty. Earl hadn't sent me to a false hope. A deafening roar echoed from just outside the crevice. The ground vibrated. They were here. I loaded the revolver, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the bullets. 6 shots. Not much against whatever was out there, but better than a poker. A shadow fell across the entrance of the crevice. A pair of glowing red eyes peered in, followed by a snout-like appendage that sniffed the air. It was one of them, the shorter, bestial kind. It let out a low growl, a sound of satisfaction. I aimed the revolver, the cold metal a stark reality in my hand, and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched sound of agony, and stumbled back. I fired again and again. I heard a heavy thud, then a sickening, whip-dragging sound as it retreated. But I knew it wasn't over. There were more. The tall one was still out there. I huddled in the crevice, revolver clutched tight, listening. The forest outside was filled with furious, frustrated sounds, howls, screeches, the splintering of wood. They were searching, raging. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning. The sounds eventually grew more distant, then faded altogether, replaced by the drip of water in the crevice and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I didn't dare move until the first faint light of dawn began to filter through the fog, painting the world in shades of gray. Cautiously, I peered out. The area around the rock outcrop was a scene of devastation. Trees were scarred, the ground torn up. Patches of something dark and viscous stained the earth where I'd shot the creature. But they were gone. I waited another hour, then another, until the sun was higher, burning off the last of the fog. Then, with the revolver in my hand and the new flashlight illuminating my path, I started walking. I didn't head back towards the tower. I followed the compass heading Earl had given me for the emergency extraction point, a disused logging road several miles further west. It was the longest, most terrifying walk of my life. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves sent my heart leaping into my throat. But I kept going. It took me most of the day, but I finally stumbled onto the logging road. A overgrown track barely discernible from the surrounding forest. And there, parked in a small clearing, was Earl's ancient pickup truck. He was leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette, looking as ancient and weathered as the mountains themselves. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. "Figured you'd be along," he said, his voice gravelly. Flare went up. Heard the commotion. "Thig, they were real," I stammered, sinking to the ground. The adrenaline finally leaving me, replaced by an bone-deep exhaustion. "The rules, they're all real." Earl took a long drag from his cigarette, then exhaled a stream of smoke. "Always have been. This mountain, it's an old place. Older than us. Got its own ways, its own residents." "Why?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind for weeks. "Why have lookouts here? Why put people through this?" He looked out at the endless expanse of trees, his gaze distant. "Someone's gotta watch for fires. And someone's gotta feed the mountain, so to speak. Keep it satisfied. Most times, the rules are enough. Most times, folks last their contract, a little spooked, a little wiser, but they walk away. Sometimes," he shrugged, a small, tired gesture. Sometimes the mountain gets hungry." The voice on the radio said the catch was empty. I told him. Earl snorted. "They lie. That's what they do. Try to trick you off the path into their territory. The old growth. That's where they're strongest." He looked at me then, a flicker of something almost like respect in his eyes. "You did good, Hayes. Stuck to the important rules. Most don't have the stomach for it when things get loud." He pushed himself off the truck. "Come on. Let's get you out of here. You've earned your pay. And a long rest somewhere far away from Chestnut Ridge." I never went back. I took my pay and I left. I moved to a city, a place full of concrete and noise and people. As far from the deep, silent woods as I could get. But even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding. The echo of scratching from a cellar I left far behind, or the faint, metallic clang of wind chimes in a silent room. And I never, ever whistle in the dark. Some rules, you learn, are best followed for a lifetime, because the mountain remembers. And it's always hungry.